Thanks, Nick. The Total War series has finally freed itself from its historical shackles and teamed up with the behemoth fantasy franchise that is Warhammer. That is 2 types of war in one.
But is it a match made in heaven like peanut butter and chocolate? Or is it an abomination like oysters and ice cream? Whatever it is, this is Total War Warhammer.
The Total War series has always prided itself on being historically nerdy and accurate, embracing parts of history that most other games ignore.
But over the past few installments, no matter which time period it's gone to, the traditional mix of swordsmen, spearmen, artillery and cavalry, while enjoyable, has started to feel a bit samey to us.
Yeah, so I was excited to jump into this fantasy realm. It just seemed to be exactly what the Total War franchise needed, a new lease on life.
And I'm glad to say, it has done exactly that.
Oh man, the first time you see a giant spider smash into your neat little formations and send your men flying. Or you see a single guy riding a griffin demolish a whole unit single-handedly. You realize you're going to need to reevaluate some of those long-held Total War strategies you rely on.
Yeah, there are some big changes to the formula going on here. Let's dive right in and talk about the campaign. So from the outset, we could play as the Empire, Orcs, Dwarfs, or the Undead. The Bretons are around, but they're not playable in the campaign.
You can play as Chaos with some DLC you get for free if you pre-order the game or buy it in the first week, but that wasn't unlocked as an option when we reviewed this.
The traditional Total War campaign map now covers the Warhammer fantasy realms, and campaigns still follow a pretty traditional formula where you'll need to capture or control a certain amount of territories, then just tick a few other win conditions and you can claim victory.
But within that, almost everything else is just a bit different, or a lot different in some cases. It's almost difficult to know where to start with all the changes they've made.
Yeah, well, let's start with the big ones. So in previous Total War games, I always felt like most factions played more or less the same way. But here, while there are fewer playable factions than usual, I loved how each one was much more specialized, with their own particular quirks and mechanics to take into account. Not to mention their vastly different rosters of unique units.
So the Orcs, for example, have armies that have a fightiness rating. If they don't fight much, they get restless and start fighting amongst themselves.
I'm all this way.
But if they fight a lot, they start a wah, which spawns an extra army to fight alongside them.
The Dwarfs have a book of grudges, so when they lose battles or territory, it goes into the book and you'll basically get a little quest you have to carry out to remove the grudge.
No transgression should remain unpunished, my king.
If you let too many grudges pile up, then you'll be hit with more and more penalties.
And I also loved how settlements on the map are split up into 2 types. There are some on the plains that humans and vampires can inhabit, and then there's those in the mountains and wastes that only dwarves and orcs can live in. It just adds an interesting new wrinkle to how you plan your overall strategy, because you have to consider trying to find more diplomatic ways to control regions you can't occupy, that or just raiding them and razing them to the ground.
Speaking of which, diplomacy plays a much bigger role in this than I remember from the other games. Factions were just really proactive, constantly making pacts with me and pushing for me to join wars or stop wars.
Yeah, it seems like a much more viable way to actually grow your empire. I managed to pretty much take control of entire swathes of countryside just by asking nicely.
By Sigmar's will, come in peace.
Welcome, my countrymen.
Please is the magic word, as they say. Speaking of magic, there's magic now. Some of your lords have magic abilities, and there are also various wizards and spellcasters you can bring into battle, and each have a set of unique spells you can unlock as they gain experience. These range from buffing your units or debuffing your enemies, or ones that can call down powerful attacks.
I think magic is something that could have been quite overpowered, but it's really quite restrained, and I actually think players will need a bit of practice to get the most out of it.
Yeah, so basically across the campaign map there's a thing called the Winds of Magic, and that determines how much magical power is available in battles. But even when there's quite a lot of wind, You'll only have enough reserves to cast a few handfuls of spells during a fight, and maybe 2 or 3 at any one time before you'll need to wait for your reserves to refill. So you have to be clever about it and use them sparingly.
Yeah, and it's also just one more thing you have to juggle in the midst of battle. And battles are more hectic and scrappy than ever before, so finding the right time to find your wizard, position him, and cast an effective spell can all be a bit much.
The AI is in top form. Even on normal difficulty, it's relentless. Your flanks and rear are almost always under siege from cavalry or flying units, and they won't ever sit back and let you bombard them with artillery. They get in your face and do not let up. Hex, in this game, I had some of the most intense Total War battles I have ever had.
Yeah, definitely. I found it much harder to pull off some of those underdog victories. I mean, even just managing a victory from an outmatched foe rarely felt like a sure thing. It can just be so easy to get distracted by one part of the battlefield, only to realize some hero unit has just torn through your lines somewhere else.
And speaking of heroes and lords, they've been fleshed out a lot more this time around. Like in the last few Total War games, you'll need to raise a lord to lead your armies.
Yes, but each faction also has 2 legendary lords, which are major characters in that faction. The Empire has Emperor Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt, for example. These guys can never be killed in battle, only wounded, so you'll have access to them throughout the campaign, and by endgame they'll be super units.
My rule is absolute!
And not only are they strong units, but as they level up, they'll gain access to special multi-part missions. These involve ticking off a series of objectives and culminate in a special battle. Win that, and you get yourself a sweet bit of gear.
I did like the focus on getting gear and leveling your characters. It just made me so much more invested in them, and likewise devastated when I lost a strong hero too.
Yeah, I think one thing they've nailed overall is the balance. Even with the introduction of giant units, flying units, magic, and vastly different races, everything still has a counter. And that's no small achievement.
Yeah, it's impressive how they've balanced those super units so that they feel and look imposing and overpowered like they should, but they still don't break the game.
Sigma, preserve us!
They had a great layer of spectacle and stress to battles too, and they helped to bring a unique flavour to each of the factions.
One thing I noticed that I am not sad about is that there's no more naval combat. All those battles just auto-resolve now, just like the good old days.
Yeah, they've never been a strong point, have they? Just wrangling those slow ships has never held up to the thrilling on-land battles in the series.
It's nice, I feel like they're listening to their fans. Technically, the game runs quite well, and I think it's quite a good-looking game. I didn't really find any bugs, except one. And it was a fairly game-breaking one, too. Basically, I was having a great time leading the Empire to victory.
Fight, men! Fight for our right to live!
And about 100 turns in, the Chaos Lord Archaon rocks up and started sending Chaos Hordes into the land. So I had to defeat him to win the campaign, but when I got to the Chaos Wastes, he wasn't there.
Now,
Is it time? Onwards!
Nicked off! AFK! Gone to pot! So my grandma would always say, "You've gone to pot!" Never really understood what it meant.
bring me to my men. Let's go.
Well, we were playing pre-release code and there was a patch, so maybe that's something that got fixed for release.
Yeah, I hope so. It was a pretty anticlimactic end to my reign.
Well, I mean, he was gone. You know, technically that's a victory, isn't it? You just scared him off.
It's a technical win. How exciting. Overall, though, I had such a good time with this game, and I can't wait to go back and try again with another race. I think we say this every time there's a Total War game, Hex, but I think this is the best Total War game yet. Yeah, I'm giving it 4.5 stars.
Yeah, and in true fantasy fashion, I think this is just the first game in a planned trilogy, so hopefully they start bringing in some of those remaining factions and fleshing this out. They're definitely onto a winning formula, though. I'm giving it 4.5 as well.